Thank you very much for this kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. The topic for this panel discussion is similarities and difference in how the technology is applied and what results achieved. Together with me is Thor Laerdal, Thor Adriansen, and István Szőke. Thor is from the CEO from the Laerdal Medical Company, and Thor is from the Norwegian Competence Center for Helicopters here at Sola, and István is from the International Research Foundation for Energy and Nuclear Technology. They've prepared a short introduction of their background and their thoughts to the topics, and we will start immediately with Thor, please.
Yeah, good morning. I have a couple of slides just as a very brief introduction, and I thought there was one first, yes. This is about healthcare and life sciences, and simulation is a relatively new theme in this sector. Let's say 20 years ago it really started. Before that, as we will have from others in the panel, simulation was used extensively in pilot training in the military and so on. But let me just try to set the stage when it comes to opportunity of simulation in healthcare. And I'm proud to say my father established our family company and actually introduced the first patient simulator around 1960. It was a simulated drowning victim, and that resuscitation mannequin has later then been the training tool for training of 300 to 400 million people in life-saving techniques. And here you see a photo from the mentioned SAFER Simulation Center, which is a collaboration, a foundation that was established in 2006 by the University of Stavanger, the University Hospital of Stavanger, and Laerdal Medical. And this has now over 10, 12 years been developing to, I think, a nice success story. It had over 14,000 participant days last year and forms an important part of training of healthcare personnel in the region. The opportunity of patient simulation is that it offers realistic training in rare and difficult cases. These patient cases are not available on demand, but training can be very focused and realistic by programming the simulators and putting the simulators in a context of reflective learning and facilitated debriefing. These two terms are really what makes simulation work. It's not the technology, it's not the simulator, it's the context where a skilled faculty is taking the students through reflective learning and facilitated debriefing. This can happen with no harm being done to the patients, and training in teams, those who work in teams. Medical education has been very much a matter of training the specialists separately, and not much cross-training of doctors and nurses in teams. This is what simulation allows, and it is all important for really capitalizing on the opportunity of simulation. It also allows worksite refresher training. You can have a high bolus of initial training in a simulation center, but there should be regular refresher training at the worksite, i.e. at the hospital or in the ambulance service and so on. And finally, repetition is possible. You can't repeat something on a patient, but you can sure do it in the simulation setting. So that is why patient simulation has really a major role to play in trying also to deal with the big problem of medical errors and improving patient safety. It is estimated that as much as 300,000 Americans and over 1 million patients in the rich countries alone may be dying from unexpected incidents happening during hospitalization, and simulation training is a major effort then to try to deal with that. I'll stop there and leave it to the rest of the panel, I think.
Thank you. My name is Thor Adriansen, and I've prepared some slides for you.
Maybe get the slides from Thor, please. Yes. Thank you.
We are currently building up a new company called Norwegian Competence Center Helicopter here at Sola, close to Stavanger. And our first customer is the Norwegian Air Ambulance, where we support then simulator and training services. This is a long-term contract with NLA, servicing the helicopters that they use. There were one H145 and H135 from Airbus. There are 13 different HEM spaces that the NLA operates from, and there are 48 crews to be trained. And within this area is quite regulated. The European aviation authorities states that there is a need for training with simulators. So each crew have to train at least 12 hours in a simulator per year. So what is a team? A team could be a group of people with the same goal. Could be named crew, could be named squad, but it is important that these people in the team have a common goal and in a situation maybe like one for all and all for one. So how could we train or help the team to be better? And of course, all of you have heard about different accidents, and the normal procedure is then starting to blame something or someone about the accident. So I think there is two ways to look upon this, as a person approach or a system approach. And I think there is no black and white image to that. And I also claim that there are no success without failure, only fairy tales. So our challenge is then to do all the failures in a simulator instead of in the real life. So one wise guy said something about facts or state of mind to training or learning. So for the team, you need to have individual training, of course, for each person in the team, but there need to be a team training where the total team train on their different tasks. And there need to be an integrated mission training, because that team is not maybe on its own, it will interact with other teams or with surroundings. And one important thing is to go further and do what we call high-risk operational training, where we have scenarios created where people train on these. And of course, malfunctions. This is something that we cannot train on in real life. You can experience it, but it takes many years to get experience. And of course, doing debriefing, and awareness training is also important, but one issue that we have to understand is to train to do things on improvisation. So how could we train to improvise, to handle the unexpected, to apply? And also continuous training. We don't do like in education, you do an education and then you get your certificate or diploma, and that's it. In this area, you have to train over and over again. So we call it train as you fight, fight as you train. So a crew in this respect for the NLA personnel is one pilot who is running the show with a helicopter, and there is a rescue man, and there is a medical crew member. They have different roles, but also need to cooperate together, because here, time is life. So do the things right is, of course, important. And also to have a holistic view on team training, because there are many people involved in this team to be a complete function. And also to use different training means to reach this goal.
Thank you. The next slides from István, please.
So first of all, I'd like to tell you that my current field is not in the healthcare, but I'm very happy that I was invited here, because we talked about before, or we heard in a presentation, that on a higher level all the sciences come together, and maybe we can learn from other industries. I work at the Institute for Energy Technology, and we are involved in the energy industry in general, including nuclear energy and oil and gas and renewable energies as well. And one of the things that we do is simulation, for example, is a very strong field in our work. But in general, application of advanced information technologies to improve the processes. And I already see that there's a lot of synergies between what we do and our challenges, and so probably there's a lot of things that we can exchange. My department is involved in the transportation industry, for example, and thus also we talked about collaboration and bringing proximity, bringing people together. In Norway, for example, there are small airports across the country, and it's a big challenge how to operate these in a more centralized way. And also in the oil and gas industry, we have a lot of oil platforms scattered here in the ocean, and it's a big challenge how to bring all these together. And now we are in the information age, and there's technologies, there's possibilities to actually work stronger together without actually needing the proximity. So I hope this picture that we saw before will change in the very near future. I'm leading a research program within the OECD Halden Reactor project, which looks into application of advanced information technologies and particular simulation technologies for improving practices in decommissioning. And that's also has some, I know that it sounds very far from healthcare. On the other hand, there are some particular issues that are similar. So just would like to tell you that this is a big collaboration. There's 20 countries involved in this, and Norway, and this Institute for Energy Technology is the leader of this collaboration, which is very nice because we have access to all the stakeholders in this area. So I will show you that we are actually developing software tools, simulation tools that we use and also sell actually to improve the practices in the nuclear industry. And one of our core expertise is risk and hazard visualization. So of course simulation in general has been there for quite a while, and especially when it comes to pilots and so on. In our case, the special challenge is to show the risks and the hazards to the people doing a complex procedure. And of course, it could be some similar challenges in the healthcare as well. In our case, it's mostly radiation. So people have to work in complex radiation environments. So we are looking into advanced user interfaces to actually show the people in training, for example, training system where people see the risks and can train for complex procedures. And this is a slide where I could talk for hours, and this is very important because we talk that technology is only one side of the story, how we integrate it with the people and how we integrate it in the process. And this process, if you see it on a higher level, it could be taken as society. Society has to be ready. It's not, simulation is very easy, it's just a screwdriver. If you don't know how to use it, then it's useless, basically. And this is exactly where we are doing a lot of research, how to apply simulation technologies for a specific issue. And here we work together, technical people work together with industrial psychologists, for example, to measure human performance and to compare what actually works. And just two very little examples for healthcare that could be relevant. You know, visualization of radiation, for example, could also be interesting in healthcare when it comes to surgical procedures under X-ray and when it comes to preparation of nuclear medicine. And this is the two areas that we are looking into, and we got an invitation recently from Oslo Cancer Cluster to present some of the things. And here I will be very quick. I will just show you some of my earlier background. This is also simulation technology, where we looked into radon, which is a concern in Norway, and we also use simulation technology, the different simulation technology, for actually finding the correlation between the radon concentration, the living conditions, and lung cancer. And here we see simulations for actually interaction of the radiation alpha nuclides with the tissue, but also the technology can be used for optimizing inhalation of aerosol medicines, targeted medicine therapy. And I'm not sure if this can be started. It's just to if you could click on the little triangle in the middle. This is just to show you an example of a simulation. This can be very interesting. This is our reactor, which is underground. Probably most of you haven't been into a nuclear reactor. Now you have a chance to go into our nuclear reactor, which is one of the 2 reactors in Norway. And this shows a little procedure. Maybe you can just click into the middle, and then you will see a little bit of radiation visualization. If you could just click in the middle of the video, just go in, yeah, something. So our specialty here is that we visualize radiation and other, possibly other hazards and risks while doing complex procedures. Okay, thank you. I think hopefully I didn't take too long.
No, thank you very much. This was a really interesting presentation. I think, as everybody of you said, there's a kind of big similarity, but not working together actually. One of the topics is human errors. Do you have any ideas how frequent it is? My expectation would be that it's quite the same level, but maybe the definition for human error is not similar between the lines of work. So what ideas, how frequent are human errors in your line of work, and how is it defined? Just please.
Actually, I think I had a slide with a comparison of human errors in the different industries. There's some in the level of the human errors. There's a big difference between the different industries, and I know that aviation was very bad before, and now it has improved through the CRM practices and so on. In the nuclear industry, of course, human errors are a special concern, especially for people working in control rooms, which is very similar to people piloting, for example, planes, because you are sitting in one place. In my field of work, it's actually a bit more difficult, because then people are moving around in a hazardous area, and because of that, the simulation technology is where you could improve and measure possibility of human errors is more difficult. We have a lot of studies going on for control rooms and for piloting, with sitting and looking at controls, and there's not a lot at the present going on for complex procedures where people are moving around and interacting with objects and other people.
So, for instance, for NLA, I will say for the last 20 years, I think there has been 3 to 4 severe accidents. So, of course, it's very safe to fly these planes, and these pilots are very experienced and have a lot of education and training. But of course, when something happens, you have it all over the media, and of course, it always or almost always implicates some disaster, with the human lives are lost. So, of course, focusing on that, as I try to state, it is also an opportunity by the human to do something on the good. So, by allowing the man to fail, you also allow him to do something very good. So, in most cases, there are pilots out there doing a great job, helping people and in a very difficult situations. So they are trained to handle these.
It may also be system errors as much as human errors, but as was referred to, think studies reveal that it's far more dangerous to end up in hospital or to drive to the airport than to fly, and that is not because of less complexity, it's because safety and including simulation has been taken into use so much longer time and so much more systematically. As was mentioned by Thor, how the pilots are, or the crews are supposed to train in simulators 12 hours a year. In the US or internationally, I think a pilot would not be allowed to fly without going into the simulator every 6 months. And this famous case of landing at Houston River or handling a fire or a tire that will not come out or whatever, these cases will of course not be met by the typical pilot in the lifetime. So there is no way to train on this on the job. You can only train on it in a simulator. And if you do that, you have a totally different ability to handle the matter.
I think that's quite typical in the aviation industry. You have to train and you have to fly it, and then you have recurrent training. How is it for the people in control rooms? Do they have to perform simulations to work in control rooms?
Yeah, obviously, usually the power plants would have a simulator, which is like a copy of the control room, where they can perform procedures and they can of course observe what causes failures and where the human errors are more likely. And for the control rooms, it's quite well established, I would say. And we also have control room simulations, full scope simulators. When it comes to procedures where people are, as I said before, moving around in a complex environment, that is more difficult. And at the moment, there's not a lot of techniques established to handle that situation, as opposed to control rooms or generally sitting and looking at controls.
Are there some demands that you have to be in the control room simulator recurrent, and if you don't show up, you can't proceed with your work, or?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of requirements for the power plant operators to do different kinds of training, and including simulator-based training. Yeah. It's a bit different for maintenance personnel, for example, who are trained not for running a power plant, but for maintaining different equipment.
And you both see that as beneficial, that you have recurrent training and demands to the life.
Yes, of course. And as I stated, and as you also said, within the aviation industry, it is mandatory. So, of course, they have their pilot license, but on top of that, they have something they call typewriting. To be able to fly one particular aircraft, they need this typewriting training. And on top of that, each 6 months, they have to have 6 hours of simulator training. And that's not because they cannot fly, but it's because they cannot get the experience in the aircraft that they can get in the simulator with handling malfunctions by handling risky situations.
Thor, are you aware of some health system trying to implement recurrent certification to be competent?
No, I think the very best hospitals, the most famous hospitals in the world, have come furthest in this. It's not because they have most to learn, it's because they are sort of closest to a culture of excellence that would take this into account. If we make a comparison with fire, there are preventive fire exercises systematically. I mean, we can't open a conference like this without pointing to the exits, and every hospital, every industry company and so on would need to have fire exercises. And the purpose of the fire sort of fighting is, point one, to avoid human death and or to protect the people, and secondly to protect the equipment and the buildings. But if you imagine everything that goes into fire prevention for obviously for very good reasons. But last year there was 44 people dying from fires in Norway. And there are some 3,000 dying from pre-hospital cardiac arrest. So the same precaution has not been put into a systematic use at all, and it's high time.
Understand. This is a very short time frame we have, unfortunately, because otherwise we couldn't discuss this topic in deep. Thor, you had a wording, awareness training. Could you describe that a little bit more, because it's not known for me, and do you have awareness training in your?
Yes,
yeah.
Basically, at the moment, at least in the nuclear industry, people are open to this kind of simulator-based training when it comes to increasing their awareness, which is called awareness training. But the common consensus is that it's not at the moment, when it comes to procedures, people working in our end cannot replace hands-on training. And I agree, at the moment we have to look for a good combination of classical and this kind of training when it comes to those kind of work procedures.
Yeah, and of course, as human, when we think we master things and get used to it, we probably will slip. So that's why we then need to challenge the human being by some random tasks. So we do that in the simulator to make sure that they are on top of their toes, because they need to be aware of the situation, to read the situation, and to then handle it. So it has to be some unpredicted part of the training.
So, transferred to medical, it would mean that you're training for cardiac arrest, but something else is happening what you have not expected, and then you will call it awareness training.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. We don't use that so much. No?
Because, as you said, Thor, also, this is a tool, it's a screwdriver. So the simulator as such has no value without content. So you need to put in proper content to make it a proper training tool. And that's why we're working with that constantly to improve the content and the challenge for the trainee.
More comments on that?
So you have earlier this learning circle. That's more like a process. You're going around in a circle, but we can also look upon this like a learning sphere, where you have the core, that's the knowledge. Then you have the skills. On top of that, you have the attitude, and on the outer part, you have the creativity. So you have to have all this in hand to actually master a situation. So if you can expand that sphere, you can handle more cases without getting panic or doing error.
I think the interesting thing with this panel is that we represent three totally different sectors. And simulation is really a technique, an educational system to keep people fresh and to have them prepared for unforeseen events. And that may happen in the health sector, it may happen in totally different sectors. So although the theme of this conference is life sciences and healthcare, we saw just in Ottosen's presentation that life sciences encompass many different sectors, and so does the application of simulation. And I think it's quite interesting that if we try to mobilize sort of clusters or areas where we could collaborate and where also the university could have an emphasis, then state-of-the-art education and refresher training that applies simulation is something that's, of course, highly relevant for the healthcare sector, but way beyond that. So it's, I think, a good thing that we compare notes and see whether there are any cross-fertilization that could happen between sectors.
I think, as I said, there are so many technical solutions applicable also for the other sectors. You said that you have a risk hazard presentation, and I think that would be wet fields in your simulation. Do you have risk observation or risk fields in your simulation if they're flying in the simulator and some areas are becoming wet or something, for these could be dangerous?
No, but of course we have made different kind of scenarios prepared, so where we can train on for instance, obstacles. We can train on sling operations or night vision operations and such things. And then the instructor can also introduce different weather types all of a sudden, and this makes it a more risky situation.
Yeah, I understand. We have 5 minutes left, I see. Maybe we can talk a little bit about non-technical skills for the team. You're training with teams and we do it. So do you have a kind of curriculum? Which non-technical skills are they learning to perform better in the team in your simulators? What are you using for tools there?
Yeah, as I presented, there is 3 different type of personnel in a helicopter for NLA. You have the medical crew member, for instance. He is not only training on his medical part, but he's also training to be a crew member. We call him the 3rd crew member. So he has a role in the aircraft as well. And of course, then he has to communicate. So he's communicating with the acute medical dispatch center. He is communicating with the rescue man hanging in the rope, etc. So communication is a headline, I will say, in that, to understand each other. And that crew is training together. It's not a crew, it's the crew. And that's also important. Team training is not a team training, it's the team that needs to learn to work together. Like a soccer team, you can put a lot of good players on the field, but they will not cooperate necessarily. So they had to train together, the people that are working together.
There's a nice saying for that. The purpose of simulation is to make a team of experts into an expert team. So you may train them to be individual, very clever, but they need to be trained to work together. And that can only happen if you train in teams, those who work in teams, and use simulation quite a lot, not only for the initial education, this old conception that sort of you educate and then, or you finish your education and then you go on and treat patients is, of course, totally wrong. You're in a lifelong learning context. There are new things that needs to be learned as the medical science and treatment protocols develop, but also to keep your initial learning fresh, you need to practice it in a realistic setting, and that is what simulation-based training offers.
For us, we make a very big difference between education and training, because education can be very general, and of course simulations can be used in a general way. When it comes to training, the first thing that we do is a gap analysis to find out where the training needs are and why they fail. For example, we have eye tracking technology to see why people don't observe important information. Where are they looking at, for example? And then the training, the simulation, which can use simulation, is defined to actually close those gaps and reach the training objectives. So we use the simulation technology, but around it we build a system and we find out why this system, where people are working, with certain technologies in a certain organization, doesn't work, and we try to close those gaps, and we develop training exactly for that.
Do you teach them how to announce these errors or their observations to the other team members?
yes, especially in the control room. Of course, there's very strict rules about how people should be able to communicate and how they should be able to observe important information. As it comes out of the control room, the situation is a bit more blurry, but again, I feel more research is required.
But they can fall back to their training from the control room and using the same communication tools to transfer the information.
Unfortunately, not everything that works for the control room will work outside of the control room. This is why it's a very interesting research topic.
Okay.
But a lot of the methods would actually be interesting.
As a child, we normally draw a human by a big head and small legs and arms. So by simulation, we try to put legs and arms to this big head. So the education can give a big head, but we need some skills to actually perform our job. So simulation is a very good tool to do this.
If I could mention one last point on the theme of this conference, opportunities in the healthcare sector and life sciences. About 10% of our gross national product is used in healthcare, but it's not in industry, it's not in private research. 70–80% of that is for treatment in the public sector. And that treatment need to be in a setting of a culture of excellence that have ongoing education. It's very wrong that education is seen as a cost, that somebody can say that high quality education is expensive. What is expensive is poor education, because that brings up all the medical errors, the lack of patient safety, and the dominant cost in healthcare is the treatment cost, and we shouldn't take the competence of the medical personnel as granted. They can be improved, and patient safety can be improved, and medical errors can cost a lot less by a marginal increase in cost of education.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. I think these were nice words to finish up these, and I think the aviation and the nuclear industry have shown that they have implemented education and training much more than healthcare. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.